Hi, everyone. Today, my guest speaker is Elaine Retholtz from New York. And it is a great pleasure for me to talk to Elaine about mindfulness and about how to listen to another person in a mindful way. Elaine.
Yes.
How would you define listening?
Oh, that's an interesting question. So this is a practice that's grounded in mindfulness. And so that oftentimes when we're speaking and listening, we're not connected to the body and we float up here. In English, in the West, there's a term called talking heads that usually refers to political commentators or when people are just really being very intellectual about something. And so in terms of how, I don't know that I would define listening, but in terms of what supports mindful listening, it's really dropping into the body, staying connected to the body. For example, I'm feeling my feet on the floor and I'm feeling the seat, feeling my breath. I'm aware of looking at you. So that's part of the listening. Listening to your words, for sure, when you're speaking. Listening with all of my senses, so feeling the movement in my own heart or the opening or tightening of my gut, things like that. But also listening to what's going on within me, so that oftentimes when we're listening, we're not listening actually to hear and understand, we're listening to respond. And so really noticing that, it's not about that it's not going to happen, but noticing that habit, noticing the impatience that comes up or the nervousness or, oh, I don't know what to say. I need to be funny or smart or, how can I show that I really care? And that's all getting in the way of us actually listening to what's happening.
Mm-hmm. And what is the difference between listening and hearing?
Sometimes it's easier to use seeing for that, or we could use hearing right now. So if you just pause and notice whatever sounds are in your environment right now, and it could be the sound of my voice, or if there was something going on in my space, or it could be sounds in your space or outside your home, cars, birds, wind. It could be something from, your body, your stomach is grumbling, or you can hear your breath, or sometimes maybe, I don't know that you hear your heartbeat as much as feel it, so maybe that's not such a great. So all this is a receptive, open, spacious receptivity. Now, when we're listening, it can be more directed. I'm listening for the doorbell, right? I'm listening for, to hear footsteps or something. Or I'm directing my attention to listen to the sound of the voice of this person who's sitting in front of me. So if you think about looking and seeing is much more broad and receptive, and looking can be more focused, right? So it's a little bit of that difference. One I think is much more receptive, and the other, it's still receptive, but more targeted.
Thank you. Thank you. What you have just said, to listen to our heart beating. About 9 years ago, after I had taken part in this 8-week mindfulness-based stress reduction course program, I could listen to my own heart beating. I was really shocked. It was at night. I was shocked that I could do it.
Yeah.
And I could. Elaine is a mindfulness teacher or is a meditation teacher. Elaine is also an acupuncturist, and Elaine is also a healer. And today I would like to talk to Elaine about mindful listening, because very frequently people listen to the other person just in order to respond. And this is what you have just mentioned.
Sure.
So, and for example, I have paid attention to myself that very frequently I have conversation with someone and the person is talking, for example, and meanwhile I might have an idea, what should I ask next, or what should I tell next? So, and I know that the vast majority of people do the same. I know it, and especially I started paying attention to this after I had done this mindfulness course, mindfulness-based stress reduction course, and after I got a degree in psychology, practical psychology, and in coaching. So you pay much more attention to yourself. Elaine, what could we do in this case? So in case of, for example, if we have a conversation and if we would like to have a meaningful conversation, a deep conversation with another person. So for example, if I start feeling that now I am not really listening to another person, but I'm just trying to think about my own agenda, or I am just trying to analyze, judge, and so on. There are so many things which are blocking us. What could we do?
Yeah. So the kind of practice that I teach comes out of the insight dialogue practice that was developed by Gregory Kramer. And I teach a course called Interpersonal Mindfulness that was developed for graduates. It's for everybody, but not for everybody, but graduates of the mindfulness-based stress reduction program, or anybody that has a meditation practice where they've had experience with the willingness to take it off the cushion with their eyes closed and bring it into relationships. So the reason I want to frame this in the context of a meditation practice is that oftentimes those of us who practice think of meditation as something that we do for 5 minutes a day, for 20 minutes a day, for an hour a day, where we sit perhaps in a position we would never be in otherwise, cross-legged on the floor. We have our eyes closed and we do a practice. And then when the bell rings, it's over. And even if we have what we might think is to ourselves is a good meditation practice, oftentimes when we then go into relationship, all of that stuff is like we're on the skids, right? So the question is, how do we bring the qualities that we're trying to develop in our meditation practice, which in and of itself asks the question is like, what am I hoping for in my practice? Why do I practice anyway, right? But how do we bring this into relationships with friends, with colleagues, with neighbors, with the person on the street, the driver who cuts us off, the person in the store? How do we bring these skills into all of our relationships? So it goes beyond how do I be a better listener, but how can I be present, right? And so you asked this question about, well, what happens if I'm noticing that, I just want to interrupt and get my turn to give advice or to try to fix or to tell my story or whatever. So the first guideline of the Insight Dialogue guidelines is to pause. That noticing then becomes like a mindfulness bell. I notice this habit that right here, right now, I'm not actually listening. So then there's the opportunity to pause. So what does it mean to pause? We can pause right now. So you can keep your eyes open, just noticing what's going on in your body. Maybe it's your feet on the floor, right? Maybe it's something about the way you're breathing. Maybe it's something else. Maybe it's feeling the smile on your face, right? Maybe it's noticing, oh, I hope this is recording. Did I really hit the record button? Or something else, right? So we pause, we notice what's in the body, we notice what we're thinking. You know, what am I saying to myself right now in this moment? Right? And we notice the moods. And when I say in the body, it could also be that I'm listening to something, to you, or at least I'm trying to, but I hear something going on in the other room or outside and I'm distracted. So that's part of also what's happening right now. Oh, there's this other sound happening that is pulling my attention away. Gregory Kramer says, in the pause, all things are possible. So the first thing I would say is to practice the pause. Take a couple of breaths, come back to the body, ground yourself. Depending on who you're with, you could say, can we just stop for a minute? I notice that I'm distracted. I really want to hear what you're saying. Or it could just be like a 10-second thing, a reset. So that's one thing that I would say, the first guideline.
What you have just said about pausing, I entirely agree with you. I think it's very, very important. And I remember it was about 6 years ago. My father had Alzheimer. At that time, he was about 86 years old. And my brother and I, we decided to find a psychologist for my father. And the psychologist asked me, so what should I do? Just like at the age of 86, it's very hard to deal with anyone, just like, and especially it was my request or my brother's request and not our father's request. And we just told her that we would like him to live happier life now, because now there are so many things he cannot do now, so that he could enjoy his life even now, or be more mindful. Actually, this is what I asked her to do. And when she had her second session with my father was living in Russia, in Moscow. So I was in Moscow at that time. And I asked her and I asked my father if I could be present during that session. And it was just one of the most shocking and one of the most maybe heart-broken conversations in my life. I had been present, but I hadn't said a word. They were discussing a book which this psychologist had given to my father, which had been written by Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning. I think this is
Yes.
the English title. And my father passed away about 2 years after that conversation. So, and they were discussing this book, and it was just like for me, it was to be there and to listen to the conversation that psychologist had with my father, whom I really loved so much. And I remember that she asked him a question, and at first he couldn't say anything about that, and she was waiting. So she was pausing, and and that was the moment when I told myself that in this situation, now maybe I would have become faster. Maybe just like you don't say anything after my question for a few seconds afterwards. Maybe I continue conversation and I do it instead of you. I think this is what many people do, don't they?
Well, I think so. I mean, I think then that it's also interesting to pay attention in the pause.
Mm-hmm.
And I think even though, we're not back there in that room, but even recalling it, that what was arising in the silence and the impulse to fill the silence, how hard it is to tolerate the silence, the wanting to move in and ask it. Maybe he didn't understand. Maybe he didn't hear me. Maybe I'll ask it in a different way, or maybe it's uncomfortable for him, so I want to make him more comfortable. And to, in the pause, and this is what our meditation practice prepares us to do, to be able to tolerate the discomfort.
Yes, and this psychologist, she was tolerating this, and maybe after 1 minute or after 2 minutes, my father started talking. So, and what he was talking about, it was so shocking. Just like he said that now his situation is much worse than the situation of those Jews who were in concentration camps and so on. And they had a very meaningful discussion. So I afterwards, a few months later, I decided to study psychology. So I got my second university degree in practical psychology and in coaching. So, and I thought that there really to have more mindfulness in my life, I think it's very, very important.
Yeah.
And very frequently, for example, this is what I notice. For many people, this silent air might be unbearable. So,
right. Yeah. Not just in the listening, but if a question has been asked of me, and who knows, maybe, I mean, if it's just a question like what's 4 and 4 and I don't know the answer, there can be some discomfort, or I'll say the wrong answer. But if it's like a question that's calling, that there isn't an easy answer, then there's a listening that happens within also. And that guideline is called listen deeply. If we're the listener, then we're listening deeply without an agenda, staying grounded. But also we listen to ourselves, that as we're listening, we're connecting and we're going below the level of words. And perhaps on those kinds of questions, allowing something in the body, something in the heart to form the words. So it's like out of everything that can be spoken right now, there are so many stories that I could tell. What am I going to choose to say right now? What is most important in this moment with this person? So that's the listen deeply part if you're actually the speaker, right?
yes, and actually, as John Kabat-Zinn has said in one of his videos, and the title of this video is "Listening is the Act of Love."
Yes.
And I really, so I think that this is so beautiful. This is just like something we can give as a gift to the person who is next to you.
And also it's a gift of love to ourselves, to not have to rush in to fill in this space, but to know, if we're practicing together, to know that if you've asked me a question or I've been invited to reflect on something, that I have the space to really listen deeply and decide what we'll say. Well, I should say in this moment what's being called for. And the act of love on your part is not to interrupt or change the subject, but the act of love on my part towards myself is to really be interested in, like, what is the truth right here, right now, and to speak the truth. Right.
What you say, I'm just thinking the truth. When I record interviews, sometimes maybe my interviewer speaks for 5 or 10 minutes, and there might be so many truths I could.
Yes.
And the question is, what should I pick up? Because I mean, and in coaching as well, there is no such thing as just like ideal coaching, because you can go this way, you can go that way, you can ask this particular question and the whole conversation will go into another direction. And how to know that or that you are doing it right? Is there
Yeah.
anything right?
Well, that's why we call it practice, don't we?
Yeah, yes.
It's, yeah. I mean, even if it's a coaching practice, a psychology practice, I don't know if the terminology is the same in Hungarian, but, in English, we call it a practice, I have a coaching practice. I
In
have an
Russian,
acupuncture practice.
mhm. In Russian,
And,
they call it session, coaching session.
and the session refers to the profession or to the meeting?
To the
I
meeting.
have a,
Meeting.
oh, so, I practice as a psychologist. I
Yes, yes.
practice as an acupuncturist. I practice as a coach,
Mhm.
right? So it's not like I'm perfect at it, right?
Yeah,
What's the
yeah.
right thing? But it's a practice.
And as we know, practice makes perfect. Praise God.
Yeah. And so there's definitely, and I'm not a psychologist, but there are definitely things that when we're talking about ourselves and about the world, that, I mean, what is truth? But what we say is so influenced by our context. And, Sylvia Boorstein, who's a wonderful meditation teacher in the West, likes to say that our minds are like tofu, and it takes on the flavor of whatever it marinates in.
Mhm.
Right. And so that the stories that we tell about ourselves and about other people, and more now, there's this, those people, these divisions, are based on what we've been marinating and what we've been reading, what we've been thinking about, what we were told as children, what we're continually told, in our families and so on. So if you're sitting on the other side of that receiving, there certainly is a professional opportunity for you to look at the difference. Can you point to the difference between the self-narrative and what's underlying it, and the kernel of truth that might be underlying those stories? But that's kind of a different professional engagement, although, a friend can do that for another friend as well. Or even we can do it for ourselves when we tell ourselves something like, oh, I'm such an impatient person, or I always do this, to be, again, the pause. Notice, oh, here's this thing the mind does. And then to be able to say, is that true? And perhaps maybe even take on, you know what, I think I want to notice the moments when I'm actually patient, or the moments when I'm actually generous, or whatever the story is, to begin to notice as a practice, to pause and notice times when that's not true. And that can make the story more porous,
And Elaine, and what does it make someone a good listener?
What do you think makes someone a good listener? What's your experience?
I mean, I have a couple of very good friends to whom it's just a pleasure to talk. In fact, if I have a look at these 9 attitudes of mindfulness, according to John Kabat-Zinn, so I think that everything is present in them. So, for example, they do not judge, they accept, they are patient. I think that when we talk, they have the so-called beginner's mind. They trust, and so on. And there are some people with whom, for example, it might be very hard to talk. When you start talking to them immediately, there will be a piece of advice or some kind of criticism or judgment, or very frequently, for example, you just say something. Oh, it was more than 20 years ago. I got a Fulbright scholarship, and I was at University of California at Berkeley, and I was sharing a house with a very nice woman called Barbara. And Barbara was a wonderful person, but she couldn't listen to anyone. And imagine, and once we had a dinner, her son came, and her son told her, "Mom, imagine my wife is going to divorce me." He was in pain, so I could see it. And she told him, "Oh, I feel so sorry, Joshua. 20 years ago, when your dad told me that I'm going to to divorce you, it was so terrible for me." And
Yeah.
and afterwards, it was her story. I was looking at this poor guy, and I wanted to embrace him. So I wanted to tell her, it's not about you. Your story was 20 years ago, but his story is now. So and this is what she always did. So
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
she loved her son. She loved her son. So it was not because she didn't.
Yeah. Yeah. So, what's interesting about that is, I mean, I'm sure most of us, maybe all of us, have experienced something like that or have done it,
Yes, I have done it, and
turned it around, hopefully not in as dire circumstances, but turned it around to, oh, yes, I love to do that too. Like last weekend, and then it's all about me and what I did, right?
Mhm.
But what's interesting is that there is the potential to transform. I was just listening to Krista Tippett's podcast. She rebroadcast an interview with John O'Donoghue, this wonderful Irish poet. I mean, he died in 2008, but he talked about how biography is an identity. Biography is not identity, and that we tend to confuse that. And so that if in my past I've had a hurt that's similar to your hurt or to, my friend's son's hurt or something like that, there's a difference between talking about the story, the biography, and connecting in a way that brings empathy and connection. And even if I don't have the exact same experience, that in my life, while the details might be different, this sense of being abandoned, feeling unloved, whatever, that I can touch into that empathy, irrespective of my biography, right? And that is something that we do in our practice. That, a danger can be that we can come to think that a meditation practice means that my biography and the events that happen to me aren't important at all, and I'm just going to ignore them. That's John Well would call that spiritual bypass. Or to take it's almost like an alchemical transformation, the lead of our lives, and transform it into the gold of what? Empathy, understanding, kindness, patience, appreciation, allowing. And that's not separate from the journey that we're on.
And for example, and what should people do when, because of course, when we talk, if we discuss our weekend plans, and I tell you something, you also said, I am going to do this as well, this is absolutely fine. Or when we talk about,
absolutely,
so this is fine, but maybe some people just can't understand that this is the moment when they should give empathy, so that they should provide this kind of listening, and they should ask questions, or they should just listen. They should connect to the people, especially when people are in pain. But many people, I think, do not connect this way. They just think that if they say that, me too, I also had something similar, they think that they will help another person. But in fact, as far as I know, that they do not help by doing this, because immediately the story goes, or the conversation will go to another way. Or the son of Barbara, at that moment, he just shut up. So he stopped talking. He stopped talking to him at all. And he just left. He just left.
So, I mean, I think the thing is that there's no instruction manual for this kind of practice. There's, like if we set an intention, and again, I'm assuming that the people that I'm talking to, if you don't have a meditation practice, you might be interested in cultivating a mindfulness practice. finding a meditation class or a mindfulness-based stress reduction class so that you can begin to experience this from the inside out. And, it takes a bit of courage to show up for yourself in this way and to show up for others. And sometimes it's absolutely fine to, like interrupt and depending on your culture, when I was growing up in my family, if you weren't interrupting, it meant you weren't listening and that you weren't interested. So it was kind of like very quick and everything. And there can be a lot of laughter and joking, but paying attention that it's not always like that. Shouldn't always be like that. And sometimes in families and in friendships, it's not just about, oh, there's this great show at the museum. Do you want to come with me? Or I saw this last week. Maybe you should go, or whatever it is. But it's something else that really needs a different kind of presence. I mean, it's not 24/7 every interaction that has to, we want to be present for it, but it doesn't have to look like this deep, meaningful conversation all the time, right?
Yeah, of course, because I mean, if people do it all the time, that, in my opinion, would be a disaster. There is time to joke. There is time to tease each other and many other different things.
And can I just say that in the joking and the teasing, there also has to be some freedom, to do that, some presence that comes from that.
Now you're talking about presence. I remember when about 8 years ago, I was attending this course of mindfulness-based stress reduction course Gabor Fazekas was doing in Budapest. And once we had the following task. We had to do this exercise in pairs. And one person was supposed to tell another person a tragic story, a real tragic story, painful story about himself or herself. And a few minutes later, some kind of funny story or very happy story. But the other person was not supposed to listen. For example, just like you could have your mobile phone, you could have a look at it, you could deal with a number of different subjects. So you just didn't pay attention. And I couldn't do this exercise at all. Just like after 30 seconds, when my partner didn't pay any attention to me, I just stopped there. I stopped there. And the same happened with almost everyone. So really, just like we need presence. We need presence because otherwise, why do people communicate?
And isn't that common now? I mean, just so every day that you walk into a room, if you're living with somebody or at work or someplace, and you're asking them a question and they're like on their phone and they don't look up. And that we do that, and we do it ourselves. Somebody comes in and they're talking to me and we're in, I'm in the middle of an email and I don't even stop to say, oh, just let me finish this. I'm just like not engaging. I mean, these little robots that we have really made it much harder to be present. And so that in itself is a practice. Just put the phone down, stop, look at the person.
Absolutely. A couple of years ago, two friends of mine visited me. They came here for 2 days. And one friend was always attached to her telephone. And, 20 minutes later, both of us told her, now you took this telephone to another room and you are here in order to talk to us. So there is nothing which should distract you. So there was nothing very important. So it was just like something which normally takes place. And this is what my students frequently want to do. But for example, in my department, this is what we discussed. We do not allow our students to use cell phones when we have classes, or they're not allowed to use their laptops for checking emails or get into the social media and so on, because otherwise you cannot really pay attention to your teacher, or you cannot pay any attention to a discussion. Of course, now when the classes are online, because for a long time we have had classes online, it might be very hard to check what is really going on, because maybe the student looks at you, but meanwhile does a number of other things. But actually, I have the following idea or the following thought about it. If you feel bored about conversation, it means that you do not listen in a proper way. What do you think about it?
You know, this idea of boredom, if you feel bored in a meditation practice, if you feel bored in listening, in practice, right? So I'm going to ask you, think of a time when you're bored.
For me, it's very rare. It's very rare that I'm bored. You know, I write a lot, so there are books, articles, and sometimes maybe I spend many hours doing it, and I feel a kind of it's not really boredom, but I feel exhausted, and this is the moment when I just feel a tension that I should check my Facebook or.
Good. Okay, so you feel exhausted. Is it mental exhaustion that your attention is exhausted, or is it physical?
Mental, but as far as boredom is concerned, I might feel bored. You know, if, for example, a lecturer talks in monotonous way, but even if he or she does it in monotonous way for quite a lot of time, I have learned that in this case, or if the subject is not interesting, for example, so I know that I should pay attention to certain things. You know, sometimes there are meetings. You need to go to the meeting, but in fact, nothing important is said there. And in this case, just like, let me check how his lips are moving, or let me check certain nonverbal behavior or whatever. And in this case, if you find something, for me, it becomes very exciting. Very exciting.
Yeah, good. So the thing is that I will often tell students, I get really excited when somebody says that they find the meditation boring, or they find this activity boring, because then I'm like, what is boredom like? What is that experience like for you? You know, what were you thinking, or what were you experiencing, either emotions or in your body, in the moments before you decided you were bored? Right? So that in itself becomes a place of investigation. And when we can be interested in something that brings energy, you said yourself, you didn't say it that way, but if I could look at his lips, or I can look at this, or I can look at that. And this is where also cultivating beginner's mind comes in, because a lot of times, not always, but a lot of times the boredom comes up from, oh, this doesn't have anything new. I know this, right? And is that true? Is that really true? So, you know, that's part of cultivating beginner's mind. A lot of times we don't listen, especially if it's somebody we've known for a long time and we've heard the story before. It's like, oh, I've heard this, right? Or it might be with a student. You actually haven't heard it from this student, but you've heard it before. So you think, oh, I know exactly what they're going to say. And then you don't actually listen to what they are saying, right? So the presence has to do with noticing the boredom, pausing, softening, relaxing, noticing what's here, accepting it's like this, right? Allowing it, and seeing, you know, how can I show up right now? What can I open to? And you were describing that in terms of, well, if it's a monotone, then maybe I could pay attention to the movement of the lips, or his hand gestures, or I don't know what. But I know for me that if I zone out because I'm getting bored, then I'll come to right after that person said something that I wish I had heard. Right? Have you noticed that? So that in itself is a practice. That's part of the listening deeply, knowing our own internal mind states. But sometimes boredom can come out of, we label it boredom, but maybe it's fear. Oh, I don't want to hear this. Maybe it's impatience. Maybe it's frustration. I mean, really to pay attention. We say boredom, but what is it really?
I remember I was maybe 15 years old. I was born in Russia, and I went to school there and to university there. And I had some classmates who always complained that they were bored. So I was 15, and I just told them that I hadn't had any moment in my life, just like when I felt boredom. And as I have heard in a meditation by maybe Goldstein of emotions. There is a meditation when you focus on your emotions, and I've heard that very frequently the emotion which comes most frequently while people meditate is the emotion of boredom.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe especially for people like me, because I'm very energetic. And I'm a kind of doer. So for me, it's very hard just to be, just to be and not to do anything, especially for many decades before I started doing this meditation. I just thought, what to meditate, just to waste my time when I can be such a great multitask. I can do this or this or that. And there are yes, and there very frequently this is what I've heard, that for many people who just start this meditation practice, this is the feeling of boredom, And again, I think we are also talking to, since the topic of our discussion today is how to listen mindfully, and we can listen mindfully not only to people we are talking to, but we can listen mindfully to ourselves as well. So I think that our relationship with ourselves is at least as important, or I would say even more important, because if we cannot create a good relationship with ourselves, if we cannot listen to ourselves in a mindful way, we cannot listen to other people in a mindful way. Am I right?
Yeah, for sure. And this thing about boredom and being with our emotions when we're practicing or when we're listening, eyes open practice, relational practice, is again, like if you're in a formal practice and you're a very energetic person and it feels counterintuitive to sit still, the boredom might be the way we're labeling restlessness, mental restlessness, physical restlessness, right? It could be a way that we're labeling aversion. I don't like this. Why should I stay here? So what we're trying to do then is begin by, boredom. Okay, so how does this feel in the body? Dropping into the body. Here's the pause again. What is the breath like when I'm bored? What are my feet like when I'm bored? And it may be that we go, well, actually, I feel like I'm jumping out of my skin. So the boredom is kind of trying to cover up the restlessness, or maybe there's something else. Maybe I'm smelling a brownie cooking, and what I really want is to get up and eat the brownie. So that we can do that, whether it's with our eyes closed, feet crossed, in some peaceful posture, or when we're sitting with somebody and talking. And it's interesting when impatience can arise in any situation, but if somebody has memory challenges, say they're elderly and they have memory challenges and they're telling the story over and over again, there may be a commitment to being kind and present and receiving it, and maybe asking questions about it in a way, or maybe not, depending on the tenderness of it, that we might not have the same patience with our partners, right? Or a friend.
Yes. Ellen, and what to do, for example, if our partner or if our friends is not listening to us, and we would like him or her to be present, to give us this gift of love, and he or she doesn't want, or just doesn't think that it's important, or is busy, whatever else.
Yeah. So a lot of times people engage in the relational practice. They come to an interpersonal mindfulness course thinking that it's a how-to to fix a relationship. And as in most practice, it's really what we're looking for is results in our own hearts and minds and how we are in our relationships. Now, depending on the relationship, perhaps you can say, oh, honey, I really need you. Can you just listen to me right now? Is there a better time? I really need you to listen to me. I want to talk about this. But if that's not something, and you don't, of course, have to use honey, but if that's not something that's possible in that relationship, then recognizing that we can only change ourselves, and we can't even change ourselves, but we can only have the aspiration for changing ourselves, and we can't control how the other person is.
Mm-hmm.
And perhaps if we're, and there might be an agenda, you know, it's so easy to see, just like as we're sitting in meditation and we've got this pain in the shoulder and we say, well, okay, throbbing, aching, and that we're paying attention to it with the hidden agenda that, if I pay attention to it, it will go away, right? Which is not,
Sometimes
it's good to see that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's good to see that that's the agenda. So if we're in relationship and we're bringing a kind listening presence to the other person, can it just be pure that we want to do that for ourselves, right? Not so that they'll change, right? But it may be that as the person receives our presence, that their presence might change. Who knows? And maybe not with us, maybe with somebody else.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that generosity is always the best. So if we can be generous or given with someone else, so I think this is the best. But I remember a couple of months ago, I was involved in Zoom conversation with a group of people, my relatives actually, and one of my relatives, she just didn't say anything. She didn't ask anything, and she was sitting the way that we couldn't even see her face. And a couple of times, all of us told her that, please show yourself. So, and afterwards, my daughter and I, we were discussing this, and both of us really felt very sorry for this relative, because somehow, I mean, this is what I think, that if I'm somewhere, I would like to contribute to this conversation. I would like to bring the best. So I would like to help other people, or just like when someone says that this conversation is boring, this is why I'm not going even to say anything, or I'm not going even to ask anything. So by doing this, you just contribute to the whole stuff to be boring. Just like, why to be present at this time, or in this case.
On the other hand, she was there, right?
Yeah.
She clicked the Zoom link. She was on some level present.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe I don't know anything about this, but just in terms of teaching groups, there are some people who, and in teaching classes, there are some people who feel more comfortable sharing and some people not.
Yes.
And how do we make space for those people to say yes or no to enter in? Sometimes the conversation, of course, you're talking about a certain body language that maybe it's camera language, sitting away from the camera, blocking. But maybe, like as you were speaking, I was thinking that when I'm in a group of people and somebody's not talking, I might do a private chat saying, it's so good to see you, are you okay? And see how that is. And then we don't have any control.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Another question I would like to ask you, what kind of listener are you?
It depends on the circumstances, I imagine. I mean, certainly there are times when I'm distracted, but you know, in a class and in my friendships and family. So with my friends and family, I mean, I'm an interested listener and caring. With my students, yes, caring for sure, but curious. You know, that you know, if somebody describes something that's happening and I want to move in and with permission have a conversation with them, do some inquiry to, you know, not try to get them in any one place, not an agenda like, oh, there some light bulb is going to go off because I asked this brilliant question. But actually the guidance is to have, what am I curious about? And can this conversation actually help them land right here, right now?
And how did you learn to become a good listener?
I was a terrible listener growing up. I have to say, even as an adult, if something was threatening to me or didn't feel right, I would just change the subject, interrupt and change the subject. It was practice. I mean, it was both from my meditation practice and from not just insight dialogue and interpersonal mindfulness, but, you know, nonviolent communication is great. I can't really speak to it, but, you know, there's been a lot of things that have helped me be present with myself so that I can better be present with others. But yeah, I was terrible. I wasn't a good, I mean, there might have been one or two people that I really cared about in my life that I would give full attention to, but if I was uncomfortable, I would just change the subject, you know, interrupt. Yeah.
And for example, at the time when someone changed your subject, what did you do?
When I was younger or now?
Yes. When you were younger, because you said that when you felt uncomfortable, you changed the subject. But for example, when you brought up, or those years when you brought up a subject which maybe was uncomfortable for someone else, and when if they changed your subject, how did you feel about it?
You know, I don't have those memories as much as the memories of me interrupting.
Okay.
I have to say, I mean, I definitely have memories of not being heard or not feeling safe to speak the tenderness in my heart, but not as many memories of you know, being interrupted and changed. I mean, the culture was a lot of interruption anyway, and it wasn't always out of ill will. You know, it was just what people did. Yeah.
And you have just mentioned nonviolent communication. Do you mean Marshall Rosenberg and his workshops or his books?
Yeah, I did his books. Yeah, I don't want to speak to it because I don't even remember enough of what the steps are, but it was useful to me. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I think what's different is that a lot of times professionally, if you're taking a course, it's about how do I speak so other people will listen, but the listen means listen to me, do what I want them to do. And here it's really a different kind of listening. You know, what is it like actually to be listened to? What is it like to be responded to based on what you said, right? And what was heard? What is it like, the experience of just being able to listen without having to have an agenda of fixing or persuading or impressing, or, I mean, all that might come. But I don't know about you, but as I began to speak and listen mindfully, I noticed how exhausting it is to try to present a certain image, right? To be a certain person. Yeah.
Yeah, of
It's a
course.
lot of effort.
Yeah, because I have heard that according to research, about 47% of time our mind is not where we are. So the so-called our minds wander. And the scholars in Harvard years ago conducted this research. And from this point of view, just like when we talk very frequently, or when we listen very frequently, we do not listen, in fact, because we just think about maybe what we are going to cook, or which restaurant we are going to go to, or whatever else. And in this case, if I think about myself, yes, very frequently I do not, even when I prepare an interview, when I record an interview, I mean, I try to be as mindful as I can. But sometimes I know that sometimes there is an agenda, just like,
of course.
For example, I have a lot of questions now. So maybe just like 50 or 60 questions which I could ask. But when I record an interview, so I have a lot of questions, and I have an idea where the interview could go, but most frequently it doesn't go that direction. And this is what I like about recording interviews, because here I just have a beginner's mind. Wherever it goes, I think it is just wonderful.
And that's mindful listening. Mm-hmm. That's letting go of the agenda and just seeing what's emerging, right?
Yes.
So, I mean, I think I'm going to go back to formal practice again. Mm-hmm. So when we do formal practice, what happens is that we're making an agreement for however long it is. We're not going to do the things we usually do. I mean, the agreement, it's not like we cooperate, but the intention mm-hmm. that we're not going to distract ourselves for that amount of time. Theoretically, whatever it is, I'm not going to check my phone. I'm not going to, but nowadays it's way, way harder than decades ago, 35 years ago when I started practicing, or, now every single time there's like the slightest discomfort in our lives. Forget our practice. I could check my email. I could turn on the television. I could, all the things. I could play a game. I could, just right here in my pocket. And so we've gotten so much less resilient about staying with what's uncomfortable. Mm-hmm. And this is in our brains. I mean, being on social media, Twitter, everything's like, I had to reteach myself to read books, because everything is, you read this and you click on that, and then you read a couple of sentences and there's either another link or, oh no, I don't want to do this, and so it's much harder. And then how does that affect us when we're actually, whether it's in person or in this, virtual world, listening to each other? Mm-hmm. And in some ways, it's not our fault. Our brains are being changed so that taking on a practice of mindful speaking and listening is going against the stream of all the distractibility that's all around us. And I don't know what it's like where you are, but in the US, it's just intense.
I think it's very similar. And what I see that we should be extremely mindful in what we consume. And when I talk about consumption, it's the consumption not only of just like food or any other products, but also the consumption of social media. And having deep conversations, having mindful conversations. So I think there are hardly any other things which can be better than just when just like two people or three people or sometimes more people just get together, all the telephones, all the distractions are put away, and you you create something absolutely beautiful. So I think this is just wonderful. And could you tell me now at the end of the conversation about your relational, because you said that you teach mindfulness, relational mindfulness.
Yeah. So let me just say something, because you and perhaps I have used the word deep for deep conversations.
Mhm.
But just think about, I don't know what your situation is, but spending time with my grandchildren,
Mhm.
especially when they were younger, and it's total silliness, and
Mhm.
it's not deep conversations. It might even be pre-verbal interactions, and the deep presence that is possible, not thinking, oh, this is silly, I've got so much work, but to actually bring our full attention to those interactions. It's not like a deep philosophical thing. It's just playing,
Mhm.
right?
Yes,
That
I remember myself when my daughter was very small. Now she's 29 years old. So I played with her. I when she was there next to me, I tried to be present. I tried to be present. So, but I know some people who, when they breastfeed their babies, they can
they're
really.
on the phone.
So,
Yeah.
so once I
Yeah.
saw it, and I was so shocked.
I mean, I see people on the street here in New York who are, newborns in the stroller, and they're on the phone, with headphones. They're talking, not interacting with the baby. The baby's not napping, or even walking the dog. Walking the dog, at least you get to be outside sometimes. You can look around at the seasons and just on the phone or listening to a podcast. So we've really been training ourselves. Again, no blame. We're getting out of the habit of being present,
Yes, yes, and this.
whatever it is. Yeah.
Mhm. Yes, and this is very important. And from this point of view, I think mindfulness is extremely important. Is extremely important. Just like if we would like to feel happier, so it's better to be present, because
Yeah.
afterwards, if you are not present now, afterwards, even one day later, you do not remember what you were doing the day before,
Right.
because you were not present.
And you miss so much of the ordinary. When the pandemic, when we just closed down, in March 2020, I just started taking walks around my neighborhood, because usually I'm walking, I'm going to the subway, I'm going to my office, I'm going here, I'm going there. And I wanted to still walk. And usually I'd be at work and I'd be walking around my neighborhood, and to see that spring unfold day by day by day, the buds, the bulbs, the smells. I mean, it was just so incredible. And usually just too busy to notice often.
Yes.
Trying to get someplace. Yeah.
Yeah. And
So you asked about the course.
yes. Yes.
I think you asked about the course. The course is called an Interpersonal Mindfulness Program. It's taught in Europe as well, so people can search for interpersonal mindfulness. And I sometimes teach it. I'm in the middle of teaching it right now, and I teach in the morning, so it would be in the afternoon in Europe. So it's possible. So it's an 8-week course. It's 2.5 hours a week. There's an all-day practice day between the 4th and 5th class. So I talked about some of the guidelines: pause, relax. There's also open, attuning to emergence, listen deeply, speak the truth. So each week we explore practicing with a different guideline. What is it like to pause? And as the weeks go on, we have the saying about let the guidelines support you. So oftentimes, either in person or in breakout rooms, we're in pairs, and we're perhaps taking turns, separate speaker, separate listener, just practicing speaking and listening with the guidelines. And each week there are different contemplations. So the content of the reflections might be just noticing pleasant experiences inside, outside, with people, or unpleasant experiences, or reflecting on aging, sickness, and death. I mean, these are heavy topics. Or reflecting on generosity, or how we create a sense of self and other, right? So each week there's a guideline and a contemplation. And people who don't know each other ever before, in fact, if you know each other, I won't pair you together, have these really incredible conversations and explore what it's like to use these guidelines to support ourselves being present. So it's a great course. It's called the Interpersonal Mindfulness Program. It was developed by Florence Melio-Meyer and Phyllis Hicks with input from Gregory Kramer, who developed the Insight Dialogue practice. And just as, you know, the MBSR program is a mainstream secular program with Buddhist underpinnings, the Interpersonal Mindfulness program is a mainstream secular program that's based on this Insight Dialogue practice that's very infused with Buddhism. So that's a short
Wonderful. So,
answer. Yeah.
I haven't done this course. Is it good for couples or for friends, or just there anyone can attend this course?
So people should have a mindfulness practice.
Mm-hmm.
In my view, you don't have to take an MBSR class, but you have to have a mindfulness practice where perhaps, you know, at some point during the course, you've been in dyads using mindfulness to reflect with each other, you know, that it's not just about sitting with your eyes closed. Couples and friends do take it, but then you're usually not paired together.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Right. And it's not about fixing relationships, but it can be really useful and sweet to practice this together. So in class, you're practicing separately. And then in your life, you're noticing how it affects you.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, wonderful. I think actually, even if one, I mean, if we think about couples, even if just one person does mindfulness, it affects the whole relationship. So
Sure. Yeah.
Elaine, is there anything else I haven't asked you about how to listen in a mindful way?
No, I mean, I think it's a matter of exploration. It is a practice, and it's not, as I said, an instruction book, but just even pausing and relaxing. Just pause, notice what's here, and then since there's going to be tension and things you don't like, you know, just softening, allowing, oh, this is what it's like right now. Can I be present with this? That's a great start. That's enough. Thank you so much for the opportunity to have this conversation with you.
Ellen, thank you so much for giving me this interview. I hope that I will be able to record a number of other interviews. There are so many things you do, just like, for example, acupuncturist or healer and many other things. If one day you have time, maybe we should also talk about these wonderful things.
So we'll see. Sure. Take care.